Let's get walking. Move those legs a little bit over to the other side of the expansive Studio 9 to the Jay Onrait Lounge. That's what I'm calling it now. I've always wanted to open my own bar. And here's the greatest lounge lizard of all, Darren Dreger. How are you, buddy?
Not bad. It's been a while since I frequented one of those establishments.
Yeah, I feel like back in the day, we knew a few lounge lizards on the prairies.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes,
we really did. How are you doing? What, week and a half from the trade deadline? Are you getting any sleep?
Oh, yeah. You know what? When you get to this point with the trade deadline looming, you almost get into a position of going through the motions. And, you know, this year is a little bit more unique in the sense that we've been talking about the same guys being in play and, you know, what team needs this and the buyers and the sellers and all of that. But I honestly thought that when Lindholm and Monahan both got traded in that back-to-back, really with Vancouver and Winnipeg involved, that was going to trigger a bit more of a snowball effect, and obviously that hasn't been the case.
And it's hard to tell sometimes what teams' intentions are. Let's start with the Ottawa Senators. They're so intriguing. They played a lot better lately, but they have a handful of players on our trade bait board. Let's start with Jake Chychrun. Where did things stand with him?
Well, there's a lot of speculation, and that's been ongoing. But my position on this remains the same in that, you know, I think it's unlikely at this point that the Ottawa Senators entertain trade. Now, if somebody steps up with something that they can't walk away from that makes so much sense, ticks all the boxes, of course, Steos is going to make that play. But is there enough time for that to materialize between now and March 8th? Keep in mind, he's got the Ottawa roots. He's a big part of that team. They bring Shane Pinto back off suspension, and there's a lot more balance in that lineup than there was, you know, for the first number of games of the regular season. So, yes, again, if somebody steps up, could Jake Chychrun be traded by the Sens? He could. It feels more of an offseason move just based on the fact that there really is no urgency to get it done.
You talked about players we've been talking about all season. Chris Tanev is like the number one guy.
Yeah.
He's number 3 on our trade bait board, we should mention. But it seems like he could be number 1 because so many teams want this guy. Teams are circling now. And we've seen some front runners come to the forefront. Is there perhaps a new front runner for Tanev's services?
Well, I'm looking at the Dallas Stars.
Okay.
And the Dallas Stars do have an all-in feel right now, but they're one of those teams that is up against the cap. So it's dollar in, dollar out. There's a bit of flexibility there. There's some question as to, you know, the long-term health of Tyler Seguin. We know he's week to week, but in answer to the question, yes, the Dallas Stars definitely have interest in Chris Tanev. They need a right-shot defenseman. So there's a real strong chance that they're going to land him or at least do anything that they can to acquire this player. But Calgary isn't giving Chris Tanev away.
Of course.
I don't think the Dallas Stars really want to give up a first-round draft pick to acquire him. We know the Toronto Maple Leafs don't want to give up that first-round draft pick. Toronto doesn't have a second, so perhaps there's maybe a more creative way that Jim Nill and the Dallas Stars can get something done.
You mentioned Toronto doesn't want to give away a first-round draft pick. There's no way Toronto could possibly get him without giving that pick up, is there?
Well, not without giving up a top prospect.
Right.
And, you know, if you talk to people inside the organization, there's no appetite to push away from Fraser Minton or Easton Cowan. And, I mean, let's be honest here. If you're Craig Conroy and you're the Calgary Flames, you're looking for a piece like that.
Yeah.
If you don't have the second, you don't want to give up a first, all right, you've got to give us something of equal value. So, you know, Treliving's going to stay in the hunt. You know, there are other teams. It's not just Dallas and Toronto. But look, and there's also some talk out there, well, Toronto doesn't want to trade their first. No, they don't want to trade their first for an expiring contract like Chris Tanev.
Right.
If there's a right-shot defenseman that is either sort of available or surfaces in the next 9-10 days that has a bit of term left, then I could see Toronto moving that pick.
I don't know if there's anyone in a better position than Danny Briere, the GM of the Philadelphia Flyers. He'll be real busy over the next 9 games. Now, we should mention, you know, he's got these defensemen that other teams want. They're in a contending position. And then you lose Jamie Drysdale on Sunday. Could that Drysdale injury have any effect on how Briere approaches the deadline?
It shouldn't. You know, what'll have more of an effect is, you know, whether or not the deals that are being offered on Sean Walker and Nick Seeler sweeten to a point where Briere has to make a decision.
Right.
You know, does he move those players, Seeler and Walker, now, get the assets in return. You're talking about decent draft picks here. Or does he just simply say, look, we're not getting the trade interest, we're not getting the currency that we expect from these two key players, so we're going to focus more on trying to get an extension done. I know that there's been at least entry-level discussion on the veteran Nick Seeler.
Right.
I mean, a heart and soul, tough as nails type of guy. And if you talk to either Keith Jones or Danny Briere, they would tell you that they'd love to trade those players, get the assets, and then re-sign them as unrestricted free agents in the summer. That's perfect scenario. It probably doesn't work out that way. So the Drysdale thing complicates things a little bit.
Yeah.
But again, if the right offers are made, trades will be made as well.
And, you know, it's so funny because I don't think Briere and Keith Jones saw themselves in this position this year, right? They probably thought, no, we'll be selling everything off. And it gets a little more intriguing. Like you said, if they start to talk to Seeler about an extension and maybe the numbers make sense, all of a sudden you're going in a different direction.
Well, and look, I mean, the Philadelphia Flyers are a playoff team right now. And the fan base has received a lot more in a competitive game from the Flyers this season than they were probably expecting. So they're not going to deviate from the strategy of, if not rebuilding, repairing the foundation and restocking the draft or their young prospect pool, but they've got to get the right return.
Okay, the LA Kings, another intriguing team. They're right in the thick of the playoff race. They might be without their top point getter for a while, Adrian Kempe. He is injured in that loss to Edmonton on Monday. It's hard to figure out what Rob Blake's doing here because, you know, the goaltending situation has deteriorated over the course of the season. Does he need to make another move there? Has it changed Blake's approach to the deadline, this Kempe injury? Yeah,
it could. We're not going to know that until Wednesday, and that's because Adrian Kempe left the LA Kings road trip, and he has gone back to Los Angeles, scheduled for an MRI on Wednesday. And as you can see, he's favoring the left arm here, right?
Yeah.
So the belief is it's a wrist injury. If it's significant in that it takes him out of the regular season or until the end of the regular season, well, then that frees up the cap space, and Rob Blake perhaps gets active on the trade market. But if it's shorter term, like Arvidsson or Carl Grundstrom, those guys were week to week, but the expectation is that they'll be back before the end of the regular season. Okay. Not to get too complicated, but if you're using long-term injury space for any level of relief, and those players come back, you have to have the space to put those players back in the lineup.
For sure, no question about it. Okay, now it's time for every nature lover's favorite segment. All of your animal dreams unfurled. We're talking Darren Dreger Safari World. Okay, tell us what's happening here, Dreg.
Well, that's Tiny the Great Dane, and Tiny was taking me for a walk recently. You know, the weather was beautiful, so we were ambling through the woods, and she was just having a great time. I mean, she's a 9-year-old, spry as can be, so that's about as natural as I get these days. Although I do have a quick side story. I was in rural Manitoba on the weekend, and I drove through the Assisipi Valley, which is near Russell, Manitoba, off the Yellowhead. I got to tell you, I drove by a meadow about 4 times, and in this meadow, at one point, it counted 28 white-tailed deer.
Wow.
Just feeding in there. And you know what I knew at that point?
What's that?
A storm was coming.
Right.
And yes, an Alberta Clipper came through Sunday night and dumped a pile of snow. Temperatures plummeted. It was a blizzard, all of that. I knew this, Jay, not because of the forecast, but because the deer were feeding en masse.
Think about that. This guy's got nature covered completely. You're the man, Dregs. Thanks for this.
Thanks, Jay.